Velma is not her real name. But sometimes when we preachers tell stories, it's best not to use people's real names. So let me call her Velma and tell you a story about her. I worked with Velma back when I worked on Capitol Hill. Velma and I both worked for our member of Congress from Texas. Velma was a pure Texan. She was a grade A character. She had big hair and a thick drawl. She drove a 1974 Cadillac Eldorado, and this was in the 2000s. She drank wine with lunch and maybe with breakfast. And she cussed in the most impressive, creative ways. Due to some health complications, Velma also happened to use a scooter. Her scooter had controls on the arm, reverse, a slow speed, which she mostly used, and a fast speed, which she rarely used. Velma also had a granddaughter who went by a nickname, Pumpkin. Again, Pumpkin is not even her real name, her real nickname. Velma actually raised Pumpkin for reasons I don't remember, but the day came when Pumpkin was to be married. A good Southern wedding with tuxedos and big dresses and candelabras and rows of attendants. And Velma, who had raised her granddaughter Pumpkin, was going to be escorted down the aisle by an usher. She would be in her scooter, and the usher would walk beside her. They came in the church. She stopped her scooter at the front row, and the usher leaned over to kiss her on the cheek. And as he straightened up and turned to go to the back of the church, he bumped the control mechanism. He put the scooter in fast, and zip, off went Velma, zooming into the candles, and she slipped off her scooter. As she fell, she yelled, "Oh, blank!" But she didn't say, "Oh, blank." She yelled a 4-letter curse word that means excrement and rhymes with hit. And it probably doesn't need to be said even from the chancel of the Unitarian Universalist Church. Out in the foyer, Pumpkin, the bride, heard the commotion, peeked around the door, saw her grandmother all akimbo, and from the back of the church, she yelled, "Oh, blank!" Except she too didn't say, "Oh, blank." She too yelled the same 4-letter curse word that means excrement and that rhymes with hit, and it still probably doesn't need to be said from the chancel of a UU church. So not long after that story took place, I was with my family in Texas, my parents, my grandmother, my spouse, my brother and sisters, and I was telling them this funny story about Velma yelling, "Oh, blank," at Pumpkin's wedding. Except, since I wasn't standing on the chancel of a Unitarian Universalist church at the moment, instead of saying, "Oh, blank," I used the actual 4-letter curse word that means excrement, that rhymes with hit, and my family laughed, and as the laughter died down, my sweet Baptist grandmother said, "Tim, that's a funny story, but it would have been better if you had used the word dung. Because dung is in the Bible, you know." And she was right. My sweet Baptist grandmother knew her Bible. The word dung is used in the King James Version of the Bible 30 or 40 times. Like in Psalm 113, verse 7, that says, "God raiseth up the poor out of the dust and lifteth the needy out of the dunghills." And that is what I want to talk to you about today. Dunghills. But before I get to dunghills, let me say how appreciative I am to have the opportunity to be here at River Road today, thanks to Karin and to Alexa and to Cliff and to others on your staff who have been so hospitable. How honored I am that your senior minister asked me to preach as she is on sabbatical. You know this already, but you need to hear it again. Nancy is a fantastic colleague. She is a wise soul and a brilliant voice for justice in our community. So thanks to Karin and to Nancy and to others for sharing this chancel today. And thank you for sharing your senior minister with the world. And thank you for the consistent witness that you as the people of River Road Unitarian Universalist congregation offer. So here's what I'm guessing, River Roaders. I'm guessing that this is the only Unitarian Universalist congregation in the country this morning where the Christian guest preacher has mentioned Texas, Baptists, the King James Version of the Bible, and an expletive that means excrement, all in the opening 5 minutes of a sermon. So let's talk some more about dung. Nancy asked me to preach way back in January as she was planning her sabbatical. Doesn't January seem like 1,000 years ago? The week that Nancy asked me to preach was the same week that a prominent politician, who shall remain nameless, referred to some places in the world as dunghills. That was not the phrase the prominent politician used, but this is a sermon and dunghill is in the Bible, as my grandmother said, so let's go with that for today. I was on sabbatical during the time that Nancy issued that invitation, and that was in the news, and so I haven't had the chance to preach about that prominent politician who shall remain nameless using that phrase. And so as she asked me, I thought, well, that will be my sermon way down the road in July. And maybe that seems like old news. Really, so many things have happened on the political scene since then. So many other bizarre words have been tossed around since then. So many political kerfuffles, small and large, have erupted since January. I bet that some of you had even forgotten that this prominent politician, who shall remain nameless, referred to some countries as dunghills, because this prominent politician has referred to so many people and so many places in so many ways since then. But it happened. An elected official at the highest level of government in this country looked at other countries in the world and called them excrement. And it just keeps happening. It just keeps happening. Now, maybe that particular phrase has not been used publicly since January, but other words have been used. Criminals, gang members, worthless lowlifes, trash. And travel bans have been upheld, which certainly imply that other people are not worth our dignity. And crowds clap when those words are used, and on it goes. But it's not limited to certain prominent politicians who shall remain nameless. And it's not new, this name calling, this place shaming, if you will. This story that we read from the Christian scriptures, where a man named Philip decided to follow Jesus, and he tells his friend Nathaniel that he's found this important teacher and prophet. Philip is so excited, and he says to Nathaniel, we found this great leader and guide. His name is Jesus, and he's from Nazareth. And Nathaniel says to him, can anything good come out of Nazareth? You see, Nazareth wasn't much of a town. It was tiny, maybe even a little dumpy, unimportant to some people, maybe even a trash heap, a dunghill, a place of excrement, or other expletives maybe. You see, this is an old trick to try to belittle people by making fun of their hometown, or their country of origin, or their language, or their accent. as I said, this is not just a trick that prominent politicians who shall remain nameless use. It's a Bethesda trick too, my friends. It's a Washington insider thing. It's an East Coast elite thing as well. In fact, when I mentioned Texas earlier, how many of you shuddered just a little bit? You don't have to raise your hands, you don't have to answer, but you know you did. And how many of you, when I mentioned Texas, just briefly pictured in your mind Rick Perry or George W. Bush? And how many of you did not picture Barbara Jordan or Ann Richards or your guest preacher? And when I mentioned Baptist a minute ago, how many of you rolled your eyes? Not on the outside, because you live in Bethesda, and we don't do that externally. We internalize our eye rolling, right? And we do it all the blank time. How many of you, when I mentioned Baptist, just briefly saw Jerry Falwell Jr. speaking at his university in your mind? But how many of you did not think of Fannie Lou Hamer speaking at Ruleville Baptist Church in Mississippi? We assume, we stereotype, we're quick to dismiss based on biases. We call some places flyover states, as if parts of our country were best avoided on our way to Napa. As if the people who live in those flyover states just are not worth our time. She owns a gun, we say, as if that one fact, with which I may take strong exception, fully defines her. The middle, we say, lumping in everything from Kentucky to Nevada, as near as I can tell, as if it were singular and unexceptional and not worth our careful attention. I heard my neighbor's a Republican, we say. Or that person is illegal, we say, as if those words fully defined any human. Maybe this prominent politician, who shall remain nameless, was more vulgar with his dunghill term than we are with our sophisticated slights. Or maybe not, if we're honest. And if we're really honest, maybe we realize that we are just as guilty. And maybe, just maybe, that's why we get up and get dressed and come to church on a Sunday morning in July. Because we need the reminders of our religious traditions and spiritual impulses that there are other ways to be and other words to speak. You know the old saying that sticks and stones may break my bones, but words will never hurt me. That old saying is not true. Words hurt. Words matter. Words create worlds or destroy nations. Words shape lives or ruin them. Words nurture or diminish our souls. You know, of course, about internalized racism or internalized homophobia or internalized sexism. If you say that a person of color or an LGBTQ person or a woman is less than or other than, those words have the potential to sink in and shape that person's view of their self in diminished ways. We live into, or down into even, the expectations of others. The same thing happens if a prominent politician refers to immigrants' home countries as dunghills. Of course, a deported teenager may go home and be part of a gang. When he's been told he's a loser, when he's been told he's trash, he may live into that expectation. Of course, he will live into that label. And of course, a coal miner in Kentucky may feel left out of the American dream when her home state is referred to as a flyover state or those people. She may live into the expectation of left outness. Our religious traditions and our spiritual impulses, however, offer alternative ways to live and alternative words to speak. The first principle of Unitarian Universalism is the affirmation and promotion of the inherent worth and dignity of every human being. The inherent worth and dignity of every human being. Can anything good come out of Nazareth? The Christian tradition, the Jewish tradition, the Unitarian Universalist principles of worth and dignity say yes. Can anything good come out of Bethesda or Rockville or Kansas or Kentucky or Gaza or El Salvador? Buddhism and Islam and spiritual seekers across the ages say yes. Yes. Can anything good come out of Syria or Mexico or even 1600 Pennsylvania Avenue? Yes. We have to believe that. Yes. We must believe that. Yes. The world is full of bombast. We must speak the language of respect. The world is full of fear. We must be courageous enough to speak the language of faith. The world is full of pain. We must be kind enough to speak the language of love. Amen, amen, and amen.